He was born to a king and tutored by a philosopher. By the age of 20, he was a king himself. By 30, he had conquered the known world, amassing one of the largest empires in history, Alexander the Great. One of the most celebrated and enigmatic figures the world has ever seen. But how did a young Macedonian prince rise to become the greatest military commander in history? And what led to his sudden and dramatic fall? Today we'll dive deep into the life, battles, and legacy of Alexander the Great. His journey from king of a small kingdom to ruler of an empire stretching from Greece to India is nothing short of epic. Let's unravel the incredible timeline of Alexander's rise and his untimely fall. Our story begins in 356 BCE in the ancient kingdom of Macedonia. Alexander was born into a world of power and warfare. His father, King Philip II of Macedonia, was one of the greatest rulers of his time, transforming Macedonia from a small kingdom into a major power in the Greek world. But Alexander's early life was shaped not only by his father's military ambitions, but also by the intellectual influence of his famous tutor, none other than the philosopher Aristotle. Under Aristotle's guidance, Alexander developed a love for knowledge, philosophy, and the arts. This education would shape him into not just a warrior king, but a ruler with a vision for uniting East and West. Yet, the true turning point in young Alexander's life came in 336 BCE, when King Philip was assassinated. At just 20 years old, Alexander ascended to the throne. Many saw him as young and inexperienced. They would soon learn how wrong they were. As soon as he became king, Alexander faced immediate challenges. Neighboring kingdoms and Greek city-states saw Philip's death as an opportunity to rebel against Macedonian rule. But Alexander was no ordinary king. In a display of both brilliance and brutality, he crushed the revolts, starting with Thebes, which had risen against him. He razed the city to the ground as a warning to others. With Greece firmly under his control, Alexander set his sights on an even greater ambition: conquering the Persian Empire, the largest and most powerful empire in the world at the time. For Alexander, this wasn't just a war of conquest, it was personal. His father had planned an invasion of Persia, but died before he could carry it out. Now Alexander would fulfill that dream. In 334 BCE, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Asia with 40,000 troops, embarking on what would become one of the most legendary military campaigns in history. His first major victory came at the Battle of Granicus, where he demonstrated his bold and decisive leadership. But this was just the beginning. The Persian Empire, ruled by King Darius III, was vast and wealthy, but Alexander's military genius, combined with his charismatic leadership, allowed him to outmaneuver and defeat Persian forces time and again. His next major victory came at the Battle of Issus in 333 BCE, where he personally led a cavalry charge that routed Darius' much larger army. Darius fled the battlefield, leaving behind his family and his dignity. Alexander's victory at Issus sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world. But he didn't stop there. In 332 BCE, Alexander turned his attention to the rich and powerful city of Tyre, a critical naval base of the Persian Empire. The siege of Tyre would become one of the most famous sieges in history. After months of relentless assault, Alexander's forces breached the city's defenses and conquered Tyre. Next, Alexander marched into Egypt, where he was welcomed as a liberator. In 331 BCE, he founded the city of Alexandria, a city that would become one of the greatest centers of learning and culture in the ancient world. But while Egypt celebrated Alexander, the Persian king Darius was rallying his forces for one final showdown. In October of 331 BCE, Alexander and Darius faced off at the Battle of Gaugamela, one of the largest and most decisive battles in ancient history. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Alexander's tactical brilliance won the day, and Darius once again fled the battlefield. Soon after, the Persian Empire collapsed, and Alexander was crowned king of Persia. But even with his conquest of Persia complete, Alexander wasn't satisfied. He wanted more. With Persia under his control, Alexander now looked eastward. In 327 BCE, he launched his campaign into India, eager to push the boundaries of his empire even further. But the Indian campaign would prove to be one of the most difficult challenges of Alexander's career. In 326 BCE, Alexander faced the forces of King Porus at the Battle of the Hydaspes River. The Indian army, with its war elephants and formidable defenses, put up fierce resistance. But Alexander's troops, hardened by years of warfare, once again emerged victorious. Impressed by Porus' bravery, Alexander allowed him to retain his kingdom as a subordinate ruler. But by now Alexander's men had had enough. They had marched thousands of miles and fought countless battles. Exhausted and homesick, they refused to march any further east. For the first time, Alexander's ambitions had been checked, not by an enemy, but by his own soldiers. Reluctantly, Alexander agreed to turn back. He had reached the limits of his empire, but his legacy was already secured, or so it seemed. Alexander returned to Babylon in 324 BCE, where he began to consolidate his vast empire. He was only 32 years old, and many believed that he would spend the coming decades ruling over the lands he had conquered. But fate had other plans. In 323 BCE, just a year after his return, Alexander fell ill with a mysterious fever. Within days, the great conqueror was dead. The exact cause of his death remains a mystery. Was it poison, typhoid, malaria, or something else? Whatever the cause, his death sent shockwaves throughout the ancient world. The man who had never lost a battle was suddenly gone, leaving his empire without a clear successor. If you're fascinated by the lives of history's greatest figures and want to learn more about epic empires and ancient battles, make sure to subscribe to Ancient Perspectives. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode and dive deeper into the legends that shaped our world. Now, let's look at what happened after Alexander's death and the legacy he left behind. With Alexander dead and no legitimate heir old enough to rule, his empire was thrown into chaos. His generals, known as the Diadochi, immediately began vying for power. This struggle for control would lead to decades of conflict and bloodshed as they carved up the empire among themselves. Alexander's once unified empire was divided into several smaller Hellenistic kingdoms. The most significant were the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt, the Seleucid Empire in Persia, and the Antigonid dynasty in Macedonia. These kingdoms would continue to rule for centuries, spreading Greek culture throughout the known world and shaping the course of history. But the dream of a single, unified empire died with Alexander. The sudden collapse of Alexander's empire was due not only to his untimely death, but also to the sheer difficulty of governing such vast and diverse territories. While Alexander's charisma and military genius had held it together, his successors lacked the same vision and leadership. Moreover, the cultural and political differences among the conquered territories made it nearly impossible to maintain a unified empire. From the Egyptians to the Persians to the Greeks, each region had its own distinct identity and priorities. Without Alexander's unifying presence, these regions quickly reverted to their independent ways. Despite the fragmentation of his empire, Alexander's influence continued to shape the ancient world. His campaign spread Greek culture across 3 continents, blending it with the local traditions of the regions he conquered. This fusion of cultures, known as Hellenism, would dominate the Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds for centuries, influencing everything from art and architecture to philosophy and science. In the end, Alexander's empire may have been short-lived, but his legacy was eternal. He had transformed the ancient world in ways that few could have imagined, leaving a mark that still resonates today. Alexander the Great's rise was meteoric, and his fall, though tragic, was inevitable. But in just over a decade of conquest, he forever changed the course of history. From Macedonia to India, his empire stretched across the known world, and the cultural exchange he fostered helped to shape the civilizations that followed. His life remains one of the most extraordinary stories ever told, a tale of ambition, glory, and the quest for immortality. And though his empire may have crumbled, the legend of Alexander the Great lives on. Thanks for joining us on this epic journey through the life of Alexander the Great. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your fellow history enthusiasts. What other ancient legends would you like us to cover? Let us know in the comments below. And as always, stay curious, stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next episode of Ancient Perspectives.